The quiet seat. The night was calm, wrapped in the soft glow of city lights as Keanu Reeves walked down a quiet street in Los Angeles. The world knew him as the man who moved through chaos with grace, the actor who carried humility like a second skin. Yet beneath the calm expression, his heart carried a weight he never shared with anyone. The theater had always been his escape, a place where the world slowed down and stories spoke to him in whispers. Tonight, though, it was different. Tonight, he wasn't alone. Sandra Bullock walked beside him, her laughter echoing softly in the cool air. Years had passed since their last movie together, but something about their connection never faded. Their friendship had survived distance, fame, and silence. She nudged his arm lightly as they neared the old theater on Sunset Boulevard, the kind that smelled of time and memories. "You still remember this place?" she said, her tone filled with gentle surprise. Keanu smiled faintly and nodded. "How could I forget? This is where we first watched Rushes After Speed." The neon sign above them flickered weakly, its red light dancing across their faces. A small crowd had gathered outside, some recognizing them, others too caught in their own worlds to notice. But when Keanu held the door open for Sandra, phones began to rise, flashes slicing through the darkness. The soft murmur of the audience turned into waves of excitement. Inside, the theater felt almost sacred, dimly lit, the scent of popcorn mixed with old wood. They found their seats near the middle row, far enough to blend in yet close enough to feel the story on screen. Sandra leaned closer. "Do you ever miss being unknown?" she whispered. Keanu's eyes lingered on the curtain-covered stage. "Sometimes. But then I remember what we get to share with people. It's not about fame. It's about connection." The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the room. The screen came alive with colors, but Keanu barely noticed the movie. His thoughts drifted, drawn to the quiet rhythm of Sandra's breathing, the way her presence filled the empty spaces around him. He wasn't sure if it was nostalgia or something deeper, something long buried beneath years of restraint. A soft laugh escaped Sandra as a funny scene played, and Keanu found himself smiling without realizing. It wasn't the movie that warmed him, it was her. Yet behind his calm exterior, there was unease. Lately, he had been receiving messages from an unknown source, cryptic lines about a forgotten promise, something tied to his past. He hadn't told anyone, not even her. Halfway through the film, he felt it again. A strange weight, a sense of being watched. His instincts, sharpened through years of solitude, caught the faint movement in the aisle. Someone was standing there, hidden by the shadows, their gaze fixed on him. Keanu shifted slightly, his hand tightening around the armrest. Sandra noticed. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he murmured, though his heartbeat told another story. The figure disappeared, leaving behind a ripple of unease. Keanu tried to focus on the film, but his mind replayed the moment like a looped scene. When the movie ended, the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed again as they stood, smiling politely. Sandra waved to a few fans, while Keanu scanned the room subtly. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet his gut whispered otherwise. Outside, the cool air greeted them again. A small group of fans waited by the entrance, calling their names, asking for photos. Keanu obliged with quiet kindness, his smile genuine but cautious. Sandra noticed his distraction. "You've been quiet," she said as they walked toward the parking lot. He hesitated, then replied, "It's nothing, just a feeling." She studied his face for a moment, then placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You always trust your feelings. Maybe you should this time, too." Her words lingered long after they parted ways that night. Keanu sat in his car for a moment, the city lights blurring through the windshield. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. No name, no return address, just like the others. Inside was a single photo printed in black and white. It showed the same theater. But this photo was taken hours before they arrived. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a shadowed figure standing exactly where he had seen them during the movie. Beneath the image, a line was scribbled in uneven handwriting. "You forgot your promise, Keanu. It's time to remember." His breath caught. The past he thought he had buried was stirring again. The theater lights still glowed faintly in the distance, reflecting off the edge of the photo. Keanu's hand trembled slightly as he folded it back into the envelope. He knew this wasn't over. The feeling in his chest wasn't fear. It was recognition. Whoever was behind this knew him. Deeply. And they had just begun to remind him of something he wasn't ready to face. As the engine started, Keanu glanced at the empty street through the mirror. For a split second, a figure stood beneath the theater's flickering sign, motionless, watching his car pull away. And in that quiet, haunting moment, Keanu realized that the night at the theater wasn't about nostalgia. It was a beginning, a story that was only just starting to unfold. The letter in the rain the next morning arrived with heavy clouds hanging over Los Angeles. Rain slid down the windows of Keanu's apartment, tapping a slow rhythm that matched the weight in his chest. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the message in the envelope. "You forgot your promise." Those words had settled deep inside him like a stone dropped into still water. He placed the photo on the kitchen counter, staring at the grainy figure near the theater. Something about it felt hauntingly familiar. The handwriting, too, uneven, shaky, but precise. He couldn't shake the sense that it belonged to someone who once knew him well. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from Sandra. "You left your scarf in my car, and you look like you didn't sleep." "Coffee?" He smiled faintly at her timing. She always had a way of balancing light and shadow. Within an hour, they met at a quiet cafe tucked between narrow streets, a place where no one asked for autographs. The rain softened to a drizzle outside, and the faint scent of coffee and rainwater filled the air. Sandra studied him as he stirred his drink slowly. "You're distracted," she said, her voice calm but curious. "Something's bothering you." Keanu hesitated. He trusted her more than anyone, yet this felt different, personal, almost dangerous. Still, keeping it inside felt worse. He reached into his jacket and handed her the envelope. She unfolded the photo, her expression tightening with each second. "This was taken before we even got there," she said quietly. "Who sent it?" "I don't know," Keanu replied. "There have been others. Messages, notes, all without names. I thought it was just noise, but this feels like a warning." Sandra looked up, concern deep in her eyes. "What kind of promise do you think they're talking about?" Keanu exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the rain outside. "A long time ago, before I was even acting, I met someone. She helped me when I was completely lost. I made her a promise. But I never kept it." The cafe grew quieter, the sound of rain filling the pauses between his words. "She wanted to make a small film, something about hope. She believed stories could heal people," she said. "One day, you'll tell a story that saves someone's life." I told her I would help her make it happen. He stopped for a moment, a faint tremor in his voice. "But I left. The project never happened, and she disappeared." Sandra leaned closer, her hand resting on his. "And you think these messages are from her? Or from someone who knew her?" he said. "Someone who wants me to remember." They sat in silence, both lost in their thoughts. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the world into shades of gray. Sandra finally spoke. "Then maybe you should find out who's behind it. But promise me something. Don't do it alone." Keanu nodded, though deep down he already knew he would. Some roads were meant to be walked in solitude. That evening, he returned home to find another envelope waiting by his door. This one was soaked from the rain, the ink smudged but legible. Inside, there was no photo, just a folded note. "You're getting closer. Go back to where it began." He turned the paper over. Faintly pressed into the corner was a watermark, an old logo from the small film collective he and the woman had once joined decades ago. It was called Silver Dawn Productions, a group that barely lasted a year before falling apart. He hadn't thought of it since. A faint memory surfaced. The small studio they had used downtown, hidden behind an abandoned bookstore. His pulse quickened. The next day, Keanu drove through the rain-soaked city to the address. The building was half forgotten, its windows boarded and walls cracked with time. The faded sign still read Silver Dawn, the paint peeling like the years that had passed. He stepped inside, the scent of dust and old wood wrapping around him. The place was dark except for a thin line of light coming from the back room. Each creak of the floor echoed through the silence. His footsteps slowed as he neared the light. On an old table lay a single candle, half melted beside a photo album covered in dust. He brushed it open carefully. Inside were black and white photos from those early days, young faces filled with hope, film reels, and handwritten notes. And then there she was. Her name was Elena, the woman from his past. In the photo, she stood beside a young Keanu, smiling under a string of lights. Written beneath it were the words, "The story of light will find its way." His breath caught. Beneath the photo, a newer slip of paper had been tucked in. Someone had placed it there recently. "You promised her light. It's still waiting." The candle flickered. From somewhere behind him came the faint sound of movement. Keanu froze, every instinct on alert. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice steady but sharp. No answer. He turned slowly toward the sound. Shadows stretched across the walls, long and shifting. A figure stepped out from the corner, their face hidden beneath a hood. Keanu's pulse raced. "What do you want?" The figure didn't speak. Instead, they placed something on the floor, a small film reel wrapped in paper, and backed away into the darkness. When Keanu reached down, the person was gone. He unwrapped the reel with trembling hands. Scratched into the side were 3 words that made his heart stop. Elena's last scene. The candle's flame flickered violently as a gust of wind swept through the room, scattering papers across the floor. Keanu stared at the reel, his reflection glinting faintly on its metal surface. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a memory, it was a message. And whoever was behind it wanted him to finish what he had once abandoned. But deep in his chest, he felt something heavier than fear, guilt, and a quiet sense that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than he could yet understand. The reel of silence. The night was thick with mist when Keanu placed the old film reel on his desk. The small metal circle looked harmless, but something about it carried the weight of unfinished stories and buried promises. He turned it slowly in his hands, the engraved words catching the dim light. Elena's last scene. He hadn't touched a reel in years. The smell of it, the faint chemical scent of old celluloid, pulled him back to those early days of ambition and innocence, when every frame held a dream. But this reel felt different. It wasn't nostalgia that surrounded it, but something darker, something waiting to be seen. After a long breath, he decided to play it. He found his old projector, dusted it off, and set it up carefully in the corner of his living room. Rain patted gently against the windows, and the city lights outside blurred like fading memories. When the film began to roll, the sound of the machine filled the silence, a soft mechanical heartbeat echoing through the room. The image flickered onto the wall, a grainy shot of Elena standing in the same abandoned studio he had just visited. She looked young, hopeful, and alive in a way that almost hurt to watch. Her voice, faint but clear, rose through the static. "If this is found," she said softly, "then the story isn't over. Promises don't die with time. They wait." Keanu leaned forward, his chest tightening. Her eyes seemed to look directly at him through the years. "This is the last reel," she continued. "The story was never finished because someone walked away. But I believe he'll come back. He always does." Then the screen cut to black. For a moment, Keanu sat frozen. The reel continued to spin, its sound fading into silence. There were no credits, no final frame, just emptiness. He stopped the projector and stared at the wall, heart pounding. Someone knocked at his door. He turned sharply, startled by the sudden sound. Through the peephole, he saw Sandra standing there, drenched from the rain, holding a small paper bag. When he opened the door, she gave him a faint smile. "I figured you hadn't eaten." Then she saw the projector and the reel still spinning. Her expression shifted. "You watched it, didn't you?" He nodded silently. They sat together as he told her everything, the message, the studio, the figure in the shadows, the film. Sandra listened without interrupting, her expression grave. When he finished, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. "I did some searching," she said. "The name Elena Parker still shows up in a few old articles. One said she went missing 20 years ago. Police found her apartment empty except for a typewriter and a note." "What did it say?" Keanu asked quietly. Sandra looked down at her phone. It said, "He'll come back when the story remembers him." The The words struck him like an echo from another life. "That's her," he whispered. She always spoke like that, like life was a script, and every choice was a scene. For a while, they just sat there in silence. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows. Then Sandra looked up, determination in her eyes. "We should find out where that film was shot. Maybe there's something left there. Maybe someone kept her work." Keanu hesitated. "If she's gone, then maybe her story isn't," Sandra interrupted softly. "You owe her that much." Her words carried both warmth and truth, and they cut through the fog that had settled over his heart. The next day, they returned to the old Silver Dawn studio. This time, Sandra brought a flashlight, and the two moved carefully through the dark halls. The walls still carried faded posters from forgotten films. Cobwebs hung like curtains between broken beams of light. They reached the back room where Keanu had found the reel. The candle was gone, replaced by a faint trace of ash. Something else, however, caught Sandra's eye. A stack of old notebooks half hidden behind a shelf. She pulled them out and brushed off the dust. Inside, each page was filled with neat handwriting and rough sketches, storyboards, dialogue notes, and outlines. Every page ended with the same signature: Elena Parker. Keanu flipped through one carefully. "These are her scripts," he said, voice trembling. "She was still writing after I left." Then he noticed something at the bottom of the last page, a list of names. His included. Beside it, an address. "That's my old neighborhood," he said. Sandra frowned. Why would she write that there? Before he could answer, they heard footsteps outside the room. Slow, deliberate. The air grew thick with tension. Sandra turned off the flashlight, and they both froze. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. A moment of silence passed. Then, from the gap beneath the door, a folded paper slid inside. Keanu waited until the sound of retreating footsteps faded, then picked it up. On the paper, written in the same uneven handwriting as before, were 5 words. "She's waiting where it ended." Beneath it was a small key. Sandra looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What ended there, Keanu?" He stared at the key for a long time, his pulse racing. "The night I left her. That's where everything ended." Outside, thunder rumbled through the gray sky, shaking the old walls. Keanu clenched the key in his hand, feeling both guilt and a strange kind of awakening. Whatever waited for him now was tied to the choice he never faced, the choice to walk away from Elena, and from the story they were meant to tell together. He looked at Sandra. "I think I know where we need to go next." She nodded, her eyes steady. "Then let's finish what she started." As they stepped out into the storm, lightning cut across the clouds, illuminating the city below. Keanu's reflection flickered in the wet glass of the car window as he drove. In that reflection, for just an instant, he thought he saw someone sitting in the back seat, faint, almost transparent, like a memory refusing to fade. When he turned around, the seat was empty, but the air felt different, heavier, familiar, and filled with the quiet hum of something long forgotten, slowly coming back to life. The forgotten house. The road stretched endlessly ahead, slick with rain and glistening like a mirror of memories. Keanu drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind drifting through years he had tried so hard to forget. Beside him, Sandra watched the world blur by, the streetlights melting into streaks of gold and gray, the storm clouds hanging low as if the sky itself carried a secret it couldn't share. The address on the note led them to the outskirts of the city, a quiet neighborhood where time seemed to have stopped. The houses were small and faded, each one carrying the weight of forgotten lives. Keanu slowed the car as they turned onto a narrow lane. "This was where I lived before everything changed," he said softly. "Before the movies, before fame. She used to visit here. We spent hours talking about stories, about hope, about how film could heal the world." They stopped in front of an old white house at the end of the lane. It was run down, the windows covered in dust, the garden overgrown with weeds. Yet something about it felt preserved, as if it had been waiting all these years for someone to return. Keanu stepped out first, his shoes sinking into the wet grass. Sandra followed, holding the flashlight tightly. The air smelled of rain and rust. He took out the small key, the one that had been left under the studio door, and approached the front door. The key slid in smoothly, as though the lock had never been changed. When the door opened, the air inside felt heavy, thick with dust and silence. Old photographs still hung on the walls, the furniture covered with white sheets that looked like ghosts frozen in time. "It's like someone left in a hurry," Sandra whispered. Keanu nodded slowly. "She was here once. I can feel it." They moved from room to room, each step creaking under their weight. The living room still had a faint scent of lavender, Elena's favorite. Keanu's eyes lingered on a piano in the corner. A small note rested on the keys. "Play what you promised." His heart skipped. He lifted the note and stared at the words. "We used to write music together," he murmured. "She wanted to score her first film with something we both composed." Sandra glanced at the piano. "Then maybe that's what she wants you to do now." He sat down slowly, his fingers hovering over the dusty keys. When he pressed the first note, it echoed through the house, soft, fragile, but alive. A melody began to form, faint and familiar. Sandra watched quietly as he pieced together the song, each note unlocking something buried deep within him. Then, as he played, a sound interrupted the melody, a faint mechanical whirring from upstairs. They exchanged a look. Leaving the piano behind, they climbed the staircase. The sound grew clearer with each step, like an old camera running. When they reached the hallway, they saw a door slightly open, light flickering from within. Keanu pushed it open. Inside was a small room, walls lined with film reels, photographs, and handwritten notes. In the center sat an old projector, running by itself, casting a shaky light onto the opposite wall. The footage was raw, behind-the-scenes clips of Elena filming, laughing, directing people. And then, near the end, the camera turned to her face. She looked directly into the lens. "If you're seeing this," her voice said, "then the promise is alive again. I knew one day you'd return. I didn't disappear, Keanu. I just stepped out of the frame. The story needed time. And now it's yours to finish." The footage ended abruptly. Sandra exhaled slowly. "She recorded this for you." Keanu stared at the wall, frozen between grief and realization. But how did she know? How could she know I'd come back now after all these years? Before Sandra could respond, a soft click echoed from behind a shelf. She turned the flashlight toward it and found a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of film canisters. Keanu picked it up carefully and opened it. Inside was a collection of letters tied together with a red ribbon, and beneath them, a photograph. It showed Elena and Keanu standing outside this very house. In the corner, someone had written, "The light always returns home." He untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. "Dear Keanu, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you'll become the man the world sees. Maybe you'll forget the boy who believed in small stories. But if you do find this, know that I never blamed you for leaving. I just wished you had stayed long enough to see what our story could have become." He stopped reading, his voice trembling. Sandra placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You should finish it," she said softly. He nodded and continued. "I left something unfinished. Our film, our dream. The negatives are safe, hidden where it all began. If you find them, you'll find me." Beneath the letter, taped to the bottom of the box, was a small strip of film. 3 frames only, grainy but visible. They showed Elena standing under a street lamp, smiling at someone outside the frame. Keanu looked closely, and his breath caught. It was him. "This was the night she disappeared," he whispered. "We argued right before that photo was taken. She wanted to finish the film. I said we needed more time. She left angry and never came back." A heavy silence filled the room. Sandra's eyes softened. "And the negatives? Where did you start shooting that film?" He closed his eyes, the memory returning slowly. "On the pier," he said. "Santa Monica Pier. It was her favorite place." Sandra straightened. "Then that's where we go next." As they left the house, thunder cracked again in the distance. The storm had eased, but the sky was still bruised with clouds. Keanu locked the door behind him, the key still warm in his hand. As they walked back to the car, he glanced at the second-floor window. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a shadow move behind the curtain. Graceful. Still, almost familiar, but when he blinked, it was gone. They drove off into the night, the photograph resting on the dashboard. Lightning flashed once more, and for a split second, the faint outline of a woman standing by the window appeared in the rear-view mirror, watching them leave. Her face soft, almost peaceful. Some promises, Keanu thought, don't belong to time. They belong to the heart, and this story was far from over. The Pier of Echoes. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath a silver dawn, waves folding into one another like whispers too ancient to understand. The storm had passed, leaving behind air that tasted of salt and memory. Keanu and Sandra stood at the entrance of Santa Monica Pier, the wooden boards still slick with rain, the horizon wrapped in soft mist. The world around them was quiet except for the distant hum of gulls and the creak of the Ferris wheel turning slowly in the breeze. To anyone else, it was just another morning by the sea. But for Keanu, it felt like a return to the heart of everything he'd tried to forget. This is where she wanted to film the ending, he said, his eyes scanning the pier. She said the ocean represented time and that every wave carried a story. We were supposed to film a scene about forgiveness here. Sandra adjusted her jacket, watching the water shimmer. Then maybe this is where her story ended too. Keanu nodded silently, then pulled the small strip of film from his pocket, the one that showed Elena under the street lamp, smiling. He held it up to the morning light. Look at the background, he said quietly. See that wooden railing? It's the same design as this pier. She was here that night. Sandra looked closer. You think the negatives she mentioned are somewhere around here? She said she hid them where it all began, he replied. This is where we first filmed together. Maybe she left something behind. They began to search, moving slowly along the pier. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of the boards beneath their feet, the distant rush of waves, the cries of seagulls overhead. Keanu's thoughts were heavy with guilt, but beneath the weight was something else, hope. They reached the far end of the pier, where an old bench faced the sea. The paint was chipped, the metal frame rusted. But carved faintly into the wood were the letters EP. Sandra traced the initials with her fingers. Elena Parker, she whispered. Beneath the bench, Keanu noticed something unusual. A small metal box wedged between the planks. He pulled it out carefully. It was corroded from the sea air, but when he opened it, inside were several film negatives wrapped in plastic and a single folded letter. His hands shook as he unfolded it. Dear Keanu, if you're reading this, then the ocean kept its promise. You once said stories never die, they just wait for someone brave enough to finish them. Maybe this was my story waiting for you. The negatives contain the final reel. If they're ever developed, the truth will be clear. But know this, the night I vanished wasn't an accident. Someone didn't want the film to be finished. They thought it revealed too much about the things we saw, the lives we touched, and the people we could have healed. If you finish it, you'll understand. Sandra leaned closer. Someone didn't want her film to exist? Keanu's eyes darkened. She said something similar before she disappeared. She mentioned people who wanted to buy her story, twisted into something else. She refused. As the waves crashed below, a gust of cold wind brushed past them. Keanu turned toward the sound of footsteps behind them. A man stood a few meters away wearing a long coat, his face hidden by the shadow of a hood. Can I help you? Keanu called out. The man didn't move. Then he said softly, You shouldn't have come here. His voice carried an eerie calm, the kind that made the hair on Keanu's arms rise. Sandra stepped closer to Keanu. Who are you? The man ignored her question. Some stories end for a reason. You can't bring her back by opening old wounds. Keanu's voice was firm. You knew her, didn't you? The man sighed. I knew what she was trying to do. But she didn't understand the danger. She thought light could expose everything. Some things are better left in the dark. Before Keanu could respond, the man turned and began walking away. Keanu followed, but as he reached the corner of the pier, the man was gone, vanished into the morning fog as if he'd never existed. What was that? Sandra whispered. A warning, Keanu said quietly. But I'm done running from them. They took the negatives and left the pier, driving to a small photo lab that Keanu remembered from years ago. The shop was run by an elderly man named Victor, one of Elena's old friends. His hands trembled slightly when he saw the box. "Where did you find this?" Victor asked, his voice fragile. "The pier," Keanu said. "She left them for me." The man's eyes filled with sadness. "I told her not to go there that night. She said she had something important to finish. She gave me one instruction. If anyone ever brought these back, I should help them see it through." Victor led them to the back room where old film equipment still stood. He worked in silence, developing the negatives carefully. After what felt like an eternity, he loaded the film onto a reel and started the projector. The footage appeared on the wall, flickering between shadows and light. It began with Elena walking along the pier at night, carrying a small camera. Her voice filled the room. "Every story has a heartbeat," she said softly. "And when we forget it, we forget ourselves. But maybe the right person will remember." The film shifted to another scene. A conversation between Elena and an older man in a dark suit. His face was half hidden, but his tone was harsh. "You don't understand," he said. "If this film gets out, you'll ruin everything we've built." Elena stood her ground. "Truth isn't ruin, it's release." Then the footage ended abruptly with a burst of static. Victor froze. "That's all there is. The rest was damaged." Keanu stared at the screen, his mind racing. "Who was that man?" Victor hesitated. "I don't know his name, but he used to visit her. Powerful, well-connected. After she disappeared, the studio closed overnight." The room fell silent again, the projector's hum fading into the distance. Sandra turned to Keanu. So someone silenced her. "But why send you the clues now?" Keanu looked down at the photograph of Elena smiling beneath the street lamp. "Because whoever she was fighting, they didn't win. She made sure her message survived. And now it's our turn to finish it." As they left the lab, the sky had turned golden. The sun broke through the clouds, casting long beams of light over the water. For the first time in years, Keanu felt something shifting inside him, a sense of purpose, a quiet calling. He looked at Sandra. "We're going to finish her film." Every scene, every word, exactly the way she wanted. She smiled softly. "Then let's make it her story again." But as they walked back to the car, Keanu noticed a black vehicle parked across the street. Tinted windows, engine running. When he looked at it, it pulled away slowly, disappearing into traffic. He didn't say anything to Sandra, but the unease returned. He knew what the stranger meant at the pier. Some stories were dangerous not because of what they revealed, but because of who wanted them buried, and Elena's story was about to wake the past in ways neither of them could imagine. The final frame. The days that followed moved like film reels turning in slow rhythm. Keanu and Sandra worked quietly in his home studio, surrounded by scripts, notes, and memories. Every page of Elena's handwriting seemed alive, whispering fragments of unfinished dreams. The plan was simple yet sacred. Recreate her final story exactly as she wrote it. No edits, no additions. They called it The Story of Light. Sandra handled the production details while Keanu rewrote dialogue from Elena's notes, reading each line out loud as if testing how her spirit might have wanted it said. The deeper they went, the clearer her vision became. A story about a woman who helps lost souls remember who they are through cinema. The film wasn't just fiction. It was a mirror of Elena's life, but behind the creative calm, there was tension. The black car appeared more than once outside Keanu's street. Sometimes it idled, sometimes it simply passed by. He didn't tell Sandra, not wanting to pull her into danger, but he could feel eyes watching him whenever he left the studio. One evening, Sandra entered quietly while he was reviewing old footage. "You haven't slept?" she said softly. He looked up, exhaustion hiding behind his calm eyes. "I keep thinking about what she said, that truth is release. I used to think she meant storytelling truth, but maybe she meant something else, something personal." Sandra sat beside him, her tone gentle. "Maybe the truth she left behind isn't just about the film. Maybe it's about you," her words lingered. Keanu had spent years burying grief under silence, losing people he loved, escaping into roles that mirrored the loneliness he carried. Elena had once told him, "You can't tell stories about light until you've walked through your darkness." Now, for the first time, He felt ready to face that darkness. 2 weeks later, the story of Light was complete. They had filmed the ending exactly as Elena described it, at the pier, under the same lamplight where she was last seen. In the final shot, the main character looks into the camera and whispers, "I forgive you." When the editing was done, Keanu and Sandra held a small private screening at the same old theater where it all began. The lights dimmed, the audience small, just a few close friends, crew members, and the quiet hum of anticipation. As the film began, silence filled the room. The story unfolded with haunting beauty, images of compassion, regret, and rebirth woven together like poetry. Sandra watched Keanu as much as she watched the screen. His expression never changed, but his eyes glistened when Elena's original footage appeared. Halfway through, something unexpected happened. The film glitched for a moment, then displayed a frame no one had added, an image of Elena standing by the pier, looking directly into the camera. Her lips moved and her voice emerged softly through static. "Thank you for remembering." The room went still. No one breathed. The frame held for a few seconds, then faded back to the movie. When the lights came on, no one spoke. Keanu sat motionless, staring at the empty screen. Later that night, after everyone had left, he remained in the theater alone. The projector's light flickered faintly, painting his face in gold and shadow. Sandra returned quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You kept your promise," he smiled faintly. "It wasn't mine alone. She just needed someone to finish it." Sandra looked toward the screen, where faint dust particles floated through the beam of light. "Do you think she's at peace now?" Keanu nodded slowly. "I think she always was. It was me who wasn't." They stood there in silence, the sound of the projector clicking softly behind them. Then Sandra's phone buzzed. It was an email notification from an unknown address. She opened it, and her eyes widened. The message contained no text, only a video attachment labeled Scene Sir 7, Final. They watched it together. The video showed Elena filming herself on the night she disappeared. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were calm. "If this ever reaches you," she said, "then know that the story isn't about me. It's about what you'll do when you find the light again. Don't let grief become your home. Let it become your teacher." She smiled softly. "And when you play the last note, look to the seat beside you." "I'll be there." The video ended. Keanu closed his eyes, his breath unsteady. Then, almost without thinking, he walked to the piano near the stage. The same melody he once played in her house returning to his mind. He pressed the first key, then another, until the room filled with gentle, aching notes. Sandra watched silently, tears tracing her cheeks. When the final note lingered, the theater lights flickered for just a second, as if responding to the sound. Keanu looked toward the empty row of seats in front. For a brief heartbeat, he saw her, Elena, sitting quietly, smiling through the soft glow of the projector, and then she was gone. He exhaled deeply, a peace he hadn't known in years washing over him. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the wet streets. The night air was calm, carrying the scent of rain and renewal. As they stepped out together, Sandra turned to him. "What happens now?" He smiled, looking up at the stars breaking through the clouds. "Now we tell stories worth remembering," and as they walked away from the theater, the flickering marquee behind them lit up one final time, its old neon letters spelling out the title of Elena's dream, The Story of Light. The wind carried a faint echo through the quiet streets, like a whisper only he could hear. You kept your promise. And for the first time in many years, Keanu Reeves felt truly free.